Welcome everyone to Sego's App Experiences webinar on the strategic approach to test and monitor banking and finance mobile apps. In today's webinar, we're talking about how to keep your banking and finance mobile app users happy and exceptional with exceptional error-free user experiences. I'm excited we'll also be presenting a demo for you which puts theory into practice. In addition to this webinar, we have more great resources and information on our website, so please check those out at appexperience.segos.com, as well as in the handout section of your control panel. And feel free to contact us at any time. We have mobile solutions experts available who are happy to answer your questions, give you a demo, talk about your needs, or set you up with a free trial. Our speaker today is Patrick Quilter from Quillmont, who will introduce himself in just a minute. But before we start, I just want to let you know this webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending you the recording when it becomes available, so you can watch it on demand anytime. I also want to let you know the end of the webinar will be dedicated to a Q&A as time permits. So if you look in your control panel, you should see a question section where you'll be able to submit your questions. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar. You don't have to wait until the end. I'll do my best to go through your questions and field them to Patrick during the Q&A portion. And if you had a question and we weren't able to answer it, just shoot us an email at appexperience.segos.com, appexperience@segos.com, and our team would be happy to answer them for you. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Patrick.
Great, thanks Margarita, and hello everybody, good to be with you today. And as Margarita mentioned, I'm Patrick Quilter, owner of Quillmont, and I'm happy to be presenting with our partner Zygos. Zygos App Experience provides a great solution for testing on real devices, and today we'll be demoing a strategic approach for developing financial apps that considers compliance concerns, manual testing, automated testing, and then covering those automated tests and turning them into routines that can help us monitor critical transactions. But before we do that, let's start by talking about the state of financial mobile app adoption. You might think that with the general explosion in mobile app development, and with many people publishing their ideas and putting apps in the App Store, that of course financial apps are also booming. But this might not be the case. So boom or bust? Well, to support the boom theory, we can see an interesting statistic here. According to a study by Shinobi Controls, over 2 billion users will utilize mobile banking by 2019. This is a clear indication of popularity of online financial service demand. On the other hand, according to the Federal Reserve annual survey report, which focuses on mobile banking adoption trends, this could mean that we might have a little bit of a different story here. So in this statistics, for consumers who already owned a smartphone, there has only been a 1% adoption growth rate year over year for the past 3 years. And this might be because financial services and the adoption of these applications and installing them on the phones might actually just be driven by smartphone upgrades and not necessarily because people are really demanding these services. It's also important to note that the first study provides a prediction, while the Federal Reserve survey provides an observation. So the true state of financial mobile app adoption probably lies somewhere in the middle. So digging a little deeper into the Federal Reserve report, those surveyed who didn't adopt mobile app financial services shared the following reasons why. 88% said their needs were already being met by their brick and mortar branches. 78% simply didn't see a need. 73% still find security concerns to be an impediment, and this is not a surprise considering all the recent news that we've seen with data breaches in various different industries. So not just something that's specific to finance. People are just skeptical. 43% did not like doing financial transactions on small screens, and 40% conveyed a mistrust of technology. Now, with the exception of the first statistic, the 88% of folks are happy with their local corner bank. All other areas can be improved by development teams and innovation. We should be able to convey consumers and convince them of the need and convenience of banking apps. We should be able to provide a secure transaction platform. We should be able to enhance the UX design so those small screens are not cumbersome. And we should be able to break down the old barriers of mistrust when it comes to using technology. Now, even though we should be able to do these things, the financial industry has some unique challenges. And more specifically, these are considering the trade-offs between innovation versus compliance. So let's talk about some challenges we've seen from our actual financial customers in the mobile space. First and foremost is keeping up with emerging technologies. Like many industries, financial services are going through a technology revolution. For example, a Business Insider report predicts a substantial growth in mobile payments over the next coming years. PayPal is leading the way in the US and Europe, and Apple Pay and Android Pay are dominating with in-store device payments. Cardless ATM apps are also another innovation. For a lot of banking organizations, they are steadily increasing from these pilot initiatives to actually being used in practice. And perhaps the most interesting is the automation of financial services. Customers may never physically step foot in your building or utilize a drive-up window to make a deposit or meet face-to-face with a lending representative. These are all services that have been streamlined into elegant mobile app workflows. So it's clear that financial services in a digital media format are dynamically increasing. And as if it wasn't hard enough to keep up with the tech trends, compliance and regulation adds additional complexities. It's great to offer new features, but everything must remain within compliance. And from a compliance standpoint, a lot falls in the realm of security. For example, PCI, which is a set of standards that ensures a secure environment for credit card transactions. And this is a common concern for all organizations that fall under the financial services umbrella. Proper infrastructure patching are needed, and because of this, regression testing becomes a huge focus. Not regression testing from a security perspective, like rerunning penetration tests, but to verify functionality after architecture tuning occurs. Some of these things might seem like common sense, but the world's biggest banks have been fined up to $321 billion since 2009. So the price for not being able to prove compliance can be staggering. In addition to finding a balance between innovation, development teams also need to understand what key factors drive adoption. And here we see a list of the most desired consumer features since 2016. So financial institutions that provide these great features excel with their mobile apps. And this includes being able to make the mobile deposits, so taking a picture of a check and having it deposit automatically. Mobile transfers, moving money around from one person to the next, being able to pay bills online, customizing alerts so that you might get a status back based on balances that are in your accounts, being able to easily find ATM locations, customer services like we already mentioned, just being able to get virtual assistants. And then another nice feature that's really starting to roll out and become quite common is the touch features that allow you to log in or do some action through something very sensitive like a banking app and being able to authenticate yourself with the fingerprint option. All right, great. So this takes us up to the demo portion of the application of the presentation here. So I am going to share that out in 1 second. And Margarita, can you confirm you can still see my screen?
I see your screen.
Thank you.
That was a Excel sheet.
Yep, thank you. So what we're looking at here is a typical item that you would find when doing a risk assessment in a financial setting. So what we're trying to identify here are all the potential vulnerabilities that might happen in our new initiative of developing an application, a mobile application, and then categorizing them and handling them in order of making sure that we remain in compliance with some type of compliance or regulation category. In this case here, we're going to show an example of something with the e-Signature Act. And the e-Signature Act simply means that we have to ask the user of our application permission before we're allowed to send sensitive information either by email or some other means. Okay, so in our risk assessment, we put together a matrix of all the possible bad outcomes. We assign a vulnerability score to it, and then we handle them in turn. So what we're going to look at next is a sample mobile application that looks like a banking app, and we're going to assume we're at the beginning portion of developing that application. Okay, so we're going to be working on the first two screens, which are simply logging in and then verifying that we got to an accounts page. There is going to be a control on there that asks the user for information about the e-Signature Act, and we'll see that in a second. So here we're going through some steps of having an APK file, and we just uploaded it through the App Experience server, and now have installed it on one of our physical devices. And we're going to do some manual inspection to start with. So we're going to log in through the application, and we're going to get to the welcome screen. Now notice here we're on our welcome screen, and at the bottom there is a slider that asks for electronic disclosure. That's the e-Signature component here that maps to our risk matrix. And we see at the bottom the message is displaying that says, yes, you have elected. But when we initially came in, that button was off. And if I click on it a couple times here, it appears like it starts to work. But when we first logged in, we had a problem. It was displaying even though the user never agreed to it. So that could cause an issue for us and put us in violation with the e-Signature Act. So we have to take care of this issue at some point, and this is going to be a development change. So good news is we were able to upload it right on a real physical device and see how it behaves in Zygos App Experience, doing some manual inspection. And now we're going to put on our developer hat here and fix the problem that we discovered. So on the left side, we can see the structure here. This is the code that powers our Android application. And I found the error line, the defect essentially. And what I'm changing here is I don't want that message to display when I log in. I actually want to make sure that it's off, and then the user would explicitly have to put it on. So now I'm able to sign my application. I'm going to produce a brand new build of this application with the fixed defect. I'm going to go through my steps here of exporting the code, packaging it up, and producing a brand new APK file. I'm going to copy the path so I know where to find the APK file once I'm done exporting it. And we're going to go navigate to the directory. And I'm simply going to copy it right now. And I'm going to leave my development server, and I'm going to hop back over to the server that has AppX running on it. And I'm going to copy over the new build and just put it in a directory for now called version 2. So again, version 2 contains my fix. And now once again, I'm going to go through the process of uploading that APK file to our AppX server So here are my steps for that. I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to note it as the second version, put a version 2 under this name right now so I know which one is which. And this is useful because AppX can maintain a history of all of my builds. And I can separate them by the individual names. So I can always go back and have at least some audit trail of which build had the defect and which one I fixed it in. By clicking the data cable, that's what pushes the application from the server and actually pushes it to the device. So now I'm going to log in again and verify that my code update actually fixed the problem that we had just identified. And now when I come in, I see that the button is off, and I see that there's no message. And when I start toggling back and forth, it works as it's supposed to. So the user would have to explicitly allow us to send sensitive information, and they can indicate that by the slider. Now, I might determine that that's a very severe error, and I want to make sure that never happens again. I want to make sure that that never creeps back into the code by accident. Maybe somebody cuts and pastes some old code, and it accidentally gets reintroduced back into the application in other builds. So to protect against this, I'm going to create an automated test. And I'm going to check for that condition as part of my regression checkout every time I get a new build. So again, we're starting from a process of building this application from the beginning. We're assuming that this is the beginning stages of putting together this app. And we're slowly going to build up these automated tests as we find defects and test little by little through manual inspection, and then being able to run a suite of automated tests as we add more screens and features into the banking application. So right now I've set up my grid, and I have a number of controls here that I can actually drag and drop onto the grid here that are going to be the tools that I'm going to use to build my automation routine. So the first control I pull over, very logically, is going to be something that launches the application. And when I click that drop down there, I see all the apps that are loaded onto the device that's to the right. Again, this is a real physical device, so I'm seeing all the applications that are loaded on it. And I've selected my application, and I'm just going to run this one step here and see, we can see it finds the application as we expect and launches it. Then the next thing I can do is just do a recording of my login steps. And this is nice because I can just quickly start moving from one screen, one control to the next. I don't have to drag over the individual controls one at a time. I can do it much quicker by just turning on the recording at this point and driving the application to the page that I want to be on. Now, once I get here, I can turn off the recording and start working on adding a verification point. And again, we want to make sure that that condition where the button is off and yet the message at the bottom is displaying, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So we're going to work on creating this verification point, and as you can see right here, this takes a snapshot of the object level information. And then I can highlight the areas that I want this automation routine to check. So the first thing that I'm going to do is have it look at what value the slider button is set to. Okay, so that's why I highlighted the box, and I'm checking to see that the text within the box is set to off. Now with the verification widget, I get some conditions to check against here. So I'm going to go down different paths depending on whether the previous step detected that the slider button was off. So if I detect that the slider button is off, I'm going to do a second check. I'm going to see if that message at the bottom is displaying. And that's what I've created on the left side of my condition path here. I'm doing two checks. checking to see if it's off, and I'm checking to see if that other message box is displayed. And if it is displayed, I'm going to change up my flow here to count that as a failure. So let me move my failure button to the left. And then I'm going to want to put in a step that counts it as a pass if everything works out correctly. And if I put my pass step in a good location, we'll see that I only have to include that step once. So all of my continue steps, if I've continued through, that means none of those conditions and the conditions in that order are going to be a problem, and I'll end up being a pass. So I've now covered that scenario by having 2 checks in a row to see if those items are there. That's essentially saying if it's off and if that message is displaying, then it's a failure. Otherwise, everything can continue forward, and this is a successful test. The next thing that I want to do before I actually run this is I'm going to change the timeout values. Timeout values by default are at 30 seconds, and 3 seconds is really enough. So I want this thing to move somewhat quickly in the event that I don't have a problem. I want it to actually push its way through. And one other thing that I want to do here is every one of my test cases should start off with the app in a closed state. So I'm pulled over another control to put in front of my launch app that actually closes the application first, just in case it's open. Because in order to make this test case repeatable, I have to be able to guarantee that the application has been turned off, closed out, and then I can guarantee myself starting from the beginning each time. So that was the last thing that I had to put in there, was the close app. Then I can relaunch the app and actually run through and test my automated test case. All right, great. So after running it, it looks like everything worked out correctly. If I want to take a quick look at this tree structure report here, I can see all the steps that I went through, and I can see that I got to the end. And although it's a little bit tiny here, I have to move the results files around, but what's also captured with each of these steps or at the verification point is a couple of images, so I know what the expected and actual values were. So I can see those proofs when I render the results report inside of the AppX portal. So that takes care of our automation. So now we've gone from manual inspection. We've determined that we want to protect ourselves from that e-signature issue from ever happening again. So we created that automated test. Now we're going to take that automated test and leverage it in a monitoring solution. Okay, so what we're going to work with for this monitoring solution is to see how long it takes the app to load up. We're going to make sure that the application loads up within 3 seconds. So click on the app and it better launch within 3 seconds, otherwise we're going to have a failing monitoring solution. So if the app can't load in that 3 second time, that could be an indication that a backend service is down, we're not connecting over the network correctly. And we obviously want to find that stuff out before our users start experiencing that. That's the whole purpose of putting together something like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage the automated test that I've already created. I'm going to find my launch application step. And I'm going to move over a widget that is called toggle transaction. And what that basically does is it turns my transaction on, and that's when the timer starts. So we said 3 seconds. So the timer is going to start with where the widgets are that I have surrounded the launch application step with. And the other component of this is going to be another verification point. We're going to verify that we got to the launch screen, that the home screen, the login screen is actually running. Okay, so we're going to work with some controls here. We're going to make sure that we know we've gotten to the home screen if the login logo is displaying. So I can grab that control there and save that. I'm going to add some condition logic again. And this is how I'm going to control where to toggle the transaction on or off. So again, my steps right now are simply close the application, toggle my transaction on to start my timer, and then I'm going to add in the toggle transaction again to turn it off. But I'm going to add two of them here because I could have two possible outcomes. The screen could be present, in which case, all right, so let's fill out the first toggle transaction. Now from here, when I click the timer, this is what I created under the scheduling option. I created this transaction. That's where I narrowed it down to 3 seconds. That's where I defined 3 seconds. And the top one starts it, and the bottom ones stop it. So in my failed scenario, that's why I'm going to select this radio button for fail. And my pass scenario just stops the transaction altogether, and then we go through another iteration in our monitoring sequence. I'm going to run it to test it out. So we like to do this just to make sure we didn't drag over any missteps or any of the condition logic here doesn't make sense. This is a necessary point in building up the routine. And we can see on the left grid here, we can actually watch the circles getting highlighted as it goes through the individual paths. So that gives us some good confirmation that things are working correctly. And of course, we like when we get those nice green verifications. So now that that's solid, I'm going to check in the solution. And the next thing that I have to do is take the action that I created. That's the one that contains all the steps. And I have to assign it or create a test case now. So keep in mind that a test case could just be a single action, or it could be a series of actions grouped together. So I'm going to select the action that I just created here. And the test case is going to give me my ability to invoke this action through the monitor. So now that I have all of this done, I can now move and start working completely over in the scheduling section. I have all of my steps and routines defined. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up an alert. So the alert is going to control what happens when the threshold in those toggle transaction steps. It's going to indicate what happens when that fails. And I can assign a severity level to it. I'm going to call it critical. It makes sense if we can't get into the application. We have a very serious problem. And I'm setting it up so that it emails me information about the problem, that the application isn't launching. So I can set my email address up here, and if this issue occurs, I can assign it. I've defined an alert now that's going to be used in the next couple of sections here that we're going to go through. So I'm going to use that alert inside this transaction policy. Now I'm going to define a policy. And I need to give the policy a name. I have to provide a description of the policy. And with the execution level, I'm saying if this issue happens one time out of one time, I want you to send me the alert that I just defined here. So we could set this up to say, hey, if it fails 5 times in a row, then alert me. And then, of course, I have to pick my transaction policy and move over and start getting ready to reference the test case. But yeah, I could say, you know, if it happens 5 times in a row, I know there's a real problem. If it happens anything other than that, might be just some noise, and I'm not going to take any action just yet. But for launch application, we set it up. If it fails once, let us know right away. Now here I'm defining a monitoring policy, and I've attached the test case that we had created back on the scripting side. And I'm also selecting a device that I want to run the routine on continuously. So I'm setting those buttons at the bottom for this to start right away, start monitoring that condition right away, and run it continuously. So we could set it up to run every 15 minutes. In this case, we're just going to run it several times in a row. My next step is to publish this solution. I have to make sure that I release the device here, because when I have it acquired like I did, then the monitor won't be able to grab the device. So once I free it up, I'm in a good spot now to enable the monitor. Okay, and now it's all up to the app experience monitoring capability to start launching the routine. So when I come over to the web dashboard here, I can see my monitor name, and I can see it's already in a running state. So that's great. So on these dashboards, it provides the view. You can see status. You can see the most recent monitors that are running. You can see upcoming schedule runs. Now over here on the transaction summary display, we can see the total number of transactions run over specific date of ranges. There's some candlestick reports that show maximum and minimum and average run times. If we drill down into the transaction details, we can see graphical representation of the information about the runs. We can see information about quality of service. So when we start to see errors showing up, that reveals graphical information as well. And if one of the more practical places to come is into the monitoring details section. And this displays the total number of runs, the success rate, again, a graphical representation of the success rate. Now, you know, we're looking at this just running a monitor right from the beginning. So obviously these statistics become more meaningful when they're running over several iterations. But right now you can see the iteration count building up. And we have a little trend chart here. And every time we launch and monitor the application and it works correctly, we expect to see a little green check mark there. Otherwise, we'd get an X, and we can see and start to visually get some quick visual information how our monitor is performing. Now over here in the execution report section, we can see, again, more snapshot information, the return codes that are coming from the script. That was all the work that we did in setting up the monitor and doing the transaction and writing things back. We can see the all the way to the right is the unique number that of the device that the routine is running on. Here we'll take a quick look at a monitor that actually caught a failure, and we can see that same tree format that we saw inside of the scripting component. And if we wanted to see what happened during the failed step here, we were expecting one screen and we got another, and it captures the XML level of the screen that we're on, but essentially we just didn't make it to the same point that we were monitoring against, and that's what produced this failure here. But we can get to all this great information by simply navigating the portal. All right, so to summarize what we just saw, we focus on App Experience's ability to provide a playground initially for manual testing and doing some manual inspection. Then we moved into an automated test. We made it a point that we didn't want this error ever to get by us again. So to do that, we just captured a series of steps, used the widgets, and used the screens and use the grid to create a flow where we could test against that scenario. And then we turned that scenario into a script that we could just use for monitoring and made that its own monitoring routine. Additionally, AppExperience comes with an API that allows for integration with other tools to provide a more holistic solution. And by doing so, this covers other concerns with mobile app finance development, such as business requirement traceability, security auditing, data integrity, and UX testing. All right, so this takes us up to our question and answer portion. Margarita, do we have any questions from the group?
Yep, and before we go through some of them, I just want to remind you that in your control panel, there is a question section, so please feel free to send those through, and I'll be going through them. We only have a couple right now, and right now, the first one we received was, can this be used for CI/CD?
Yeah, so this question is asking about continuous integration and deployment. That's what CI/CD stands for. So, just for those that don't know, quick definition. A typical scenario. So if you think back to the application code that we had up, setting up a CI/CD environment involves having a source code repository and a continuous integration server or tool. So what's a source code repository? Things like SVN and Git are source code repositories. They're places where application developers check in their code every time they add new features in. And the continuous integration, an example of that might be Jenkins, a continuous integration tool. And what that essentially does is monitor that source code repository. And anytime somebody checks code in there, it can be set up to automatically take the latest code, automatically compile and build that APK file that we saw a little while ago that I did manually. I made my code update, and then I saved my code, and I essentially went through some steps of exporting it out of my Eclipse project. But if I was doing it with CI/CD, I would do a check into the source code repository, and all those steps would be done automatically instead of me doing them manually. The end result ends up being that APK file, and then from there, it's a matter of taking the APK file and getting it onto the AppX server. So remember that was another manual process that I did, coming over here to this wrench and going to the application tab. And then clicking some buttons here to add a new entry, and then I manually uploaded the application. So if we were going to put this together in a CI/CD process, the tools themselves, the checking in of the source code repository and the CI tool, such as Jenkins, would automatically work. They have configurations within those tools to work together naturally. But what we might be able to add in here, or what we can definitely add in here, is utilizing the APIs that come with AppExperience. And we could build a Java routine. That would be my first step, is to pick Java, and I could wire in the APIs of AppExperience, and I could build an automated routine that would do the steps that we did here, which is uploading the application to the server, and then using the APIs to push the application onto the device itself. So I could write that in a Java routine, and then I could hook that in with the steps that come after check-in, automatically build the application, and then we could deploy the application onto the device itself. and then maybe just to make it complete, if we have automated tests, we can have APIs run the automated tests that we're developing up here. So we can develop a lot of these assets manually to start with. Developing the automation routines right here, right in the GUIs and using the widgets. And then once they're in here, we could write a Java routine that automatically calls it once we've deployed the application to the device and all of that good stuff. Good question.
Great. Another question we received is, can you monitor more than one transaction per script?
Yes. So in this case here, in this action, I have a transaction that's surrounding just the launch application step and turning it on and off based on where I end up in the success failure path. If I wanted to also add in, let's say I wanted to verify that we moved from the login screen to the home page. I just wanted to make sure that login is successful and all the steps in between are. I can simply just continue to add those toggle transaction steps. I would want to give them a different name, obviously, so that when we look on the dashboard, those transaction steps show up under different names. We can clearly see which transaction steps belong to which policies, and then I would also have to consider my thresholds. Maybe I want to allow additional time for login, so I might define that particular transaction threshold to be 5 seconds instead of the one that I picked for 3. But as you can tell, I went through a series of steps just to get just to set everything up correctly to monitor my launch application step. And if because I can break it down into little pieces like that, I can set up separate transaction measurements and do the exact same thing.
Okay. These look like real devices, but are they real devices, like actual real devices, or emulators?
Nope, these are 100% real devices. So, this is an Android device here. There's also several iOS devices. We went through this kind of quick when we were setting up when we were doing our manual testing and setting up our automation. But the launching of AppX brings you into a view like this, and depending on what environment your app experience client is configured for, you'll see a list of all the real physical devices that you could potentially be working with. So that's what I have right here. And when I scroll up and down, I can get to any of these devices. So we have some Apple, we have some Android, we have different manufacturers here. So we have a whole library, and this, all depends on what your client is assigned to. Will give you the view of what's available. If I want to acquire a device, it's a matter of doing a right click here, and then now AppX is displaying the actual physical device that maps to this iPhone. The other thing to note here is that each of these are individual devices, and I know that they're individual devices, and if I ever have to refer to these devices in code and refer to one specifically, I'm going to take advantage of this MCD. So this number here is what makes the device unique from all the other devices here. Any other questions?
Yes. One more just came in. If I wanted, can I reuse a script for automation and use it for monitoring?
Yep. So that's kind of the gist of what we were putting together here. So let's look at the project structure in a little bit more detail here. So when it's got this brown coloring here, this means I have the project checked out. And if I go to my automation tab, so these are just the screens under the automation major header here, the project names are exactly the same. So we started off up here doing our manual testing. We then came down here into the automation component, and we started creating these actions here. And then we created a test case. Now, when I come down into the monitoring section, notice the structure and all the assets that were created up here are also available under this tab. It's the exact same stuff. So in our scenario, what we did is we did our automation, then we grabbed the script and turned it into something that can be monitored because we added these transaction steps to it. And then from there, it was just a matter of setting up the scheduling, and then again, it follows the exact same project structure. At least the name is exactly the same, but when we go under schedule, then we have some different folders, different names for different reasons that we're working in it like this.
Okay, and someone asked about a trial, if they can try this product out. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, you definitely can. If you go to appexperience.cgos.com/trial, you can definitely do a trial of App Experience. And that concludes our Q&A session. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and special thanks to Patrick for leading this webinar. Before we go, I just want to share a few things. We have a super quick survey when this webinar finishes that we'd love for you to fill out. It gives us an idea of how we did and gives you the chance to share what topics you'd like to hear next. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have a couple of handouts for you as a takeaway with more info on our mobile app testing and app monitoring solutions. So please don't download those from your control panel under handouts and share it with your colleagues who weren't able to attend. And at the beginning of the webinar, I also mentioned we did do a recording of this video in case you want to watch it again, and we'll be sending you a link when it becomes available shortly. So please look out for that in your email. And as you see, we offer free personal demos, free for our performance app monitoring, test automation, as well as manual testing in case you want to get a closer look, as well as you can just start a free trial as well. We also provide professional services for those who are interested in scripting, training, or consulting services. So for example, if you need help writing the scripts, which you can use, like Patrick said, both for your test automation and app monitoring on our single platform, we can help you with that as well. And finally, please check out our website, appexperience.cgos.com. Our website was launched just earlier this year, so we're adding a lot of more information and resources. If you heard of Keynote Mobile Testing or Device Anywhere, that's us. We're under a new name. We're still the same solid product and are continuously driving innovation in the mobile space. Also connect with us on social media. We're currently on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and we also have a blog. And that concludes our webinar. Thanks everyone who joined. We hope to talk to you soon and see you again in our next webinar. Happy holidays and New Year.